The crystal tumbler shattered before I registered the sound, a sharp crack followed by the slow spread of burgundy across white marble. I stood frozen in the doorway of Admiral Vincent Cross's study, my hands still gripping the manila envelope I'd carried from headquarters. The smell of aged scotch mingled with leather and old wood, but underneath it all was something else, the electric charge of recognition. He stared at me like I'd conjured a ghost from the walls themselves. "Sophia," he whispered, my mother's name. The world tilted slightly. I'd been a Marine for 8 years, trained to maintain composure under mortar fire and interrogation. But this unraveling, had no protocol. The Admiral's face had drained of color, his normally steel blue eyes wide and glassy. His left hand trembled as it hovered near his chest, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. "Sir?" My voice came out steady, professional. A miracle. He didn't answer, just kept staring, his jaw working silently. I'd arrived at his Georgetown townhouse 2 hours earlier, expecting nothing more than a routine briefing. The call had come at dawn. "Major Torres, report to Admiral Cross's residence at 1800 hours. NATO summit preparations. Formal attire." Everyone in the Pacific Fleet knew his name. Vincent Alexander Cross, 3-star admiral, architect of maritime strategy from the Gulf War to the Horn of Africa. A man whose career read like a textbook on naval excellence. Word was he hadn't taken leave in 15 years. I'd expected a walking monument to discipline. The townhouse proved me right. Every surface gleamed, books arranged by subject and publication year. Photographs aligned with mathematical precision, ships at sea, ceremonies, ribbon cuttings. Not a single personal touch. Above his desk, a brass plaque caught my eye. "Honor is the only anchor that never drags." I'd smiled bitterly at that. My own family hadn't lasted long enough for anchors or honor. When I'd entered his study that evening, he was reviewing satellite imagery, posture rigid, shoulders squared even in civilian clothes, pressed slacks, a navy cardigan over a white Oxford. He'd glanced up briefly. "Major Torres, you'll coordinate my security detail, communications liaison, and media relations for the Brussels conference." His voice was clipped, formal. 3 weeks. Understand? "Yes, sir." "Good. Dinner at 7. We'll review protocols." That was it. No pleasantries, no warmth. Just orders delivered with the emotion of a weather report. Dinner had been equally sterile. He'd poured 2 glasses of scotch, more ritual than hospitality, and asked about my service record. Reconnaissance tours in the South China Sea. Intelligence work. Languages. When I mentioned my mother, Sophia, and her time as a civilian translator in the Balkans, he'd paused mid-sip. "Sophia," he'd repeated, the name barely audible. "Yes, sir. She passed away 11 years ago." Something flickered across his face, a tremor quickly buried beneath layers of composure. We'd moved on to policy discussions, the grandfather clock in the corner marking each heavy second of silence between our words. I thought the evening would end in professional formality. Then he reached for the file on the side table, his sleeve riding up as he extended his arm. That's when I saw it. A tattoo. Small, delicate, just above his left wrist. A crimson rose with thorns that curved into the shape of an infinity symbol. The ink had faded slightly with age, but the design was unmistakable. My lungs forgot how to work. My mother had the exact same tattoo. Same placement, same wrist. She used to hide it beneath silver bangles. I'd asked about it once when I was 10, tracing the lines with my small finger as we sat on our porch in Monterey. "What does it mean, Mama?" She'd smiled that sad, distant smile she wore when talking about the past. "It's a promise that never ends, M.I.A. more. Some things are infinite, even when people are not." That was all she'd ever say. Now I stared at the Admiral's wrist, my throat constricting. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Sir, my mother had a tattoo exactly like that." He froze. The file slipped from his fingers. The glass followed, tumbling in slow motion before exploding against the floor. In the silence that crashed down around us, he whispered her name again. Sophia. Not a question. A prayer. An exorcism. I couldn't speak. My mind was rewinding through years of silence. Every unanswered question about my father, every deflection, every time my mother's eyes went distant when I asked about before. The Admiral's gaze had gone somewhere far away, somewhere I couldn't follow. He looked like a man who'd just watched his past walk through the door wearing dress blues and a name tag that read Torres. "I'm sorry, sir." I heard myself say it, my training kicking in even as my world tilted off its axis. I knelt to gather the shards of glass, hands moving mechanically. "I didn't mean." "Leave it." His voice was hoarse, barely his own. When I looked up, his lips were trembling. He said her name again, Sophia, like he was testing whether the words still fit in his mouth after decades of silence. I left shortly after that, mumbling something about an early morning briefing. He didn't try to stop me. Just stood there in his perfect study, surrounded by his perfect books and perfect career, looking like everything inside him had shattered along with that glass. I drove through Georgetown's quiet streets in a daze, the lights of the monuments blurring past my windshield. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Outside, Washington, D.C. glittered with power and history. Inside my car, I was coming apart. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex in Alexandria, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at nothing. That night, I spread everything I had of my mother across my kitchen table. An old photograph of her in translator's gear, standing beside a UN convoy. Her reading glasses, a postcard from Dubrovnik she'd never mailed. And tucked in the bottom of the shoebox, a letter I'd found after she died, yellowed and creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. The envelope said simply, V. My hands trembled as I opened it again, reading words I'd memorized but never understood. Vincent, I won't ask you to choose between duty and love. You've already made that choice, and I respect it. I'll raise our daughter quietly, far from your world. She won't carry your name, but she'll carry your strength. That's the promise I can keep. You were right. Some loves can't survive the weight of ambition. But they can survive in the people we become. Always, S. The letter slipped from my fingers. There it was. The truth I'd never wanted, written in my mother's careful handwriting. Proof that my father wasn't just an absence on a birth certificate. He was real. He had a name, a rank, a career built on the rubble of what they'd had together. And he'd whispered her name tonight like it still broke him to say it. I didn't sleep. I sat at that table until dawn, staring at the photograph, tracing my mother's smile, looking for pieces of him in my own reflection. Same sharp jawline, same deep-set eyes, same stubborn set to the shoulders. The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, uniform pressed, hair pulled back tight. I looked every inch the Marine I'd trained to be. But underneath the medals and the composure, I was my mother's daughter, raised in silence, shaped by secrets, carrying a promise I never knew existed. When I reported to headquarters, I learned the Admiral had requested my service record. Every commendation, every deployment, every mission citation, he was looking for her in me. Or maybe looking for the daughter he never knew he had. Either way, something had shifted. The ground beneath 30 years of silence had cracked open, and I was standing at the edge of it, trying to decide whether to jump or walk away. But I was Sofia Torres's daughter. And walking away had never been our way. I picked up the phone and called his aide. Tell the Admiral that Major Torres requests a private meeting. Off the record. There was a pause. Then, tomorrow, 0700. His residence. Confirmed. When I hung up, I looked at the letter on my counter, my mother's words glowing in the morning light. She'll carry your strength. I whispered into the empty room. I'll get the truth, Mama. For both of us. Outside, a jet roared overhead, and somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard her voice, steady, proud, unafraid. But I wasn't ready to be unafraid. Not yet. Georgetown at dawn was a study in contradictions, elegant brick townhouses standing shoulder to shoulder with the weight of history, politicians jogging past monuments to wars they'd never fought. I arrived at Admiral Cross's residence at precisely 0700, my uniform crisp, my spine straight, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The townhouse looked different in daylight. Less imposing, maybe. Or perhaps I was just seeing it with new eyes, not as the home of my commanding officer, but as the place where my father lived. Father. The word still felt foreign. A housekeeper, older woman, kind eyes, led me through the hallway lined with naval history. Framed commendations, photographs of destroyers cutting through gray seas, a shadow box containing his medals. Each one a brick in the wall he'd built between himself and everything that wasn't duty. He's in the study, she said softly, then added, he didn't sleep last night. Neither had I. Admiral Vincent Cross stood by the window, still in full dress blues despite the early hour. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, the ribbons on his chest, the 3 stars on his collar. He looked like what he was, a man who'd spent his entire life being exactly what the Navy needed him to be. He turned when I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Close the door, Major, he said finally. I did. The silence stretched between us like open water. He studied my face with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I held his gaze. If this was happening, it would happen eye to eye. I see her when I look at you, he said quietly. Your mother. Sir. Don't. He raised a hand. Don't call me, sir, right now. Not for this. I swallowed hard. Then what should I call you? He exhaled slowly, the sound of a man carrying a weight he'd forgotten how to put down. Vincent. Just. Vincent. He poured coffee from a silver carafe, black, no sugar, and handed me a cup. His hands were steadier than mine. I didn't know, he said, his voice rough. About you. Not until last night when you said her name and I saw that tattoo on your wrist. He stopped, corrected himself. I thought I saw it. Did you? I shook my head. No, but she had one. Exactly like yours. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were wet. Tell me. I kept my voice level, but inside, I was screaming. Tell me everything. It came out in fragments, like a mission report filed decades too late. Bosnia, 1994. He was a lieutenant commander then, assigned to NATO peacekeeping operations coordinating naval support for humanitarian missions. She was a civilian translator, fluent in 5 languages, working with refugee relocation teams in Sarajevo. She was fearless, he said, staring into his coffee. We were evacuating a field hospital under sniper fire. Most of the staff had already pulled out, but Sophia refused to leave until every patient was accounted for. I was coordinating the convoy when I took shrapnel to the shoulder. She pulled me in to cover herself. Tiny woman, barely came up to my chin, but she dragged me behind a wall like I weighed nothing. He smiled, faint, pained, beautiful. She kept pressure on the wound while calling in our position on a radio half destroyed by gunfire. Her hands were covered in my blood, but her voice never shook. When the medics finally reached us, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You owe me a drink, Commander." "So you fell in love," I said flatly. "So I fell in love." He set down his cup. We stayed together through the mission. 6 months. We knew it was impossible. I was military, she was civilian. I was being groomed for command, she wanted to stay in humanitarian work. But for those 6 months, none of that mattered. Until it did. His jaw tightened. I was engaged. Catherine Whitmore, daughter of Senator Whitmore, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. The marriage had been arranged. Not by force, but by expectation. Her father had made it clear that my career advancement depended on the right alliances. So you chose your career. I didn't choose anything, he said sharply. Then, softer, no. That's a lie. I chose ambition over love. I chose certainty over risk. And when Sophia found out about Catherine, she made the choice for both of us. She left. She disappeared, changed her name, moved to California. I looked for her, God, I looked, but she'd covered her tracks perfectly. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought she hated me. That she wanted to be forgotten. She was pregnant. The words came out cold, clinical. With me. He nodded slowly, and a tear finally broke free, sliding down his weathered face. I didn't know. She never told me. If she had, you would have what? I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. Left your senator's daughter? Derailed your precious career? Or would you have sent money and pretended we didn't exist? I don't know. His honesty was brutal. I'd like to think I would have done the right thing. But the truth is, I don't know who I was back then. I only know who I became, a man who achieved everything and felt none of it. I turned toward the window, my reflection ghostly in the glass. She raised me alone, never once asked for help, never told me who you were. She worked 2 jobs to put me through school, and when I told her I wanted to join the Marines, she cried for 3 days. My voice wavered, not because she didn't want me to serve. Because she knew I'd become just like you. Elena, don't. I spun to face him. You don't get to say my name like you've known it all along. You don't get to grieve a daughter you never looked for. You're right. He stood, shoulders sagging under the weight of his uniform. You're absolutely right, but I'm asking you, begging you, to let me try. To let me know you. Not as your commanding officer. As your father. The word hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk out and never see him again. But instead, I heard myself say, she never hated you. Even at the end, when the cancer took everything, she kept your letters. Kept that tattoo. Kept you alive in ways you didn't deserve. He flinched like I'd struck him. I found her journal after she died, I continued. She wrote about you every year on the same date, the day you met. She'd write one sentence, still infinite. Still worth it. That's what the tattoo meant. An infinite promise. Vincent Cross, admiral, strategist, architect of campaigns, crumbled. He sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood there, watching him break, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. Just a vast, empty space where anger should have been. After a long moment, he looked up, eyes red-rimmed. I want to make this right. You can't. Then I want to try. He reached for a folder on his desk, hands still trembling. There's a mission. Category 4 hurricane hit the Florida Keys 2 days ago. Civilian evacuation, disaster relief. I've been assigned as senior operations commander. I'm requesting you as my executive officer. I stared at him. Why? Because you have her heart, Elena. The same fearlessness. The same refusal to leave anyone behind. If I'm going to honor her memory, honor you, it won't be with words. It'll be with action. His voice steadied. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to show you who I should have been 30 years ago. I wanted to say no. Wanted to walk away from this broken man and his too late apologies. But something in his eyes stopped me, not hope, but acceptance. He wasn't asking me to absolve him. He was asking me to witness him try. One mission, I said finally. After that, we're done. He nodded once, sharp and military. Understood, Major. I saluted, formal, final. Permission to be dismissed. Granted. At the door, I paused without turning back. She loved you until the end. I need you to know that. I know, he whispered. That's what makes it worse. I walked out into the morning sun, the city waking around me. Joggers passed. A dog barked. Somewhere, a church bell chimed 8 times. And in my pocket, my mother's letter pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and rolled up my sleeve. The blank skin of my wrist stared back at me, empty, waiting. I thought about infinity, about promises that outlive the people who make them. And I thought about my mother's last words to me, whispered from a hospital bed as morphine pulled her under. Forgiveness isn't weakness, MIA more. It's the bravest thing a soldier can do. I didn't have forgiveness yet. But maybe I had something close, the willingness to try. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming, and somewhere in Florida, wreckage was waiting. The C-130 shuddered as we descended into Key West International, the turbulence rattling the cabin like God was shaking a tin can. Through the small window, I could see the aftermath of Hurricane Naomi, a Category 4 monster that had torn through the Keys 3 days ago like a vengeful god. Roofs peeled back like sardine cans. Palm trees snapped at impossible angles. Entire neighborhoods submerged in brown floodwater that stretched to the horizon. From the air, it looked less like a disaster zone and more like the end of the world. Jesus, muttered Corporal Hayes beside me, pressing his face to the window. I didn't respond. I'd seen devastation before, earthquakes in Haiti, tsunamis in Indonesia. But something about this felt different, more personal, as if the storm had ripped away more than just buildings. Admiral Cross sat across from me, studying tactical maps with the same intensity he'd probably brought to every mission since he was a lieutenant. We hadn't spoken beyond operational necessities since boarding in Virginia. The rest of the team, 20 Marines, 2 Navy engineers, a Coast Guard liaison, moved around us like we were 2 stones in a river. When the plane touched down, the heat hit like a slap. Humid, thick, carrying the smell of salt water, jet fuel, and something rotten underneath, the smell of a place dying slowly. The base commander, Colonel Sarah Oakes, met us on the tarmac. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, eyes bloodshot, uniform rumpled, coffee stains on her collar. Admiral Cross. She saluted. We're at 60% operational capacity. Power's still out in most sectors. We've got 6,000 civilians in emergency shelters, another 2,000 unaccounted for. Roads are impassable south of mile marker 40. Casualties? Cross asked. 43 confirmed dead. That number's going to climb. He nodded grimly. Where do you need us? Everywhere. She gestured toward a convoy of trucks waiting nearby. Major Torres, you'll coordinate supply distribution and civilian rescue ops. We've got reports of people trapped in the Upper Keys, Marathon, Islamorada. Most of the bridges are compromised. You'll need boats and helicopters. Yes, ma'am. Cross met my eyes briefly. No words, but I saw the question there. Can you handle this? I gave him nothing back. Just turned toward the convoy and started issuing orders. The next 72 hours blurred into a continuous loop of chaos. Flooded roads, collapsed buildings, people screaming for help from rooftops. We worked in shifts, 12 hours on, 4 hours to collapse in a cot that smelled like mildew and fear. I barely saw the admiral. He was embedded with command, coordinating air support and logistics from the operations center. I was on the ground, wading through chest-deep water to pull survivors from submerged cars, directing supply trucks through debris fields that used to be neighborhoods. On the second night, we lost a Marine. Private Jennings, 22 years old, swept away when a flash flood hit without warning. We found his body 6 hours later, tangled in power lines a mile downstream. I was the one who called his parents. That night, I sat alone outside the mess tent, covered in mud and someone else's blood, staring at nothing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving only exhaustion and grief. Major. I looked up. The Admiral stood there, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He offered me one without speaking. For a long moment, we just sat in silence, the distant sound of generators humming like mechanical insects. Jennings shouldn't have been there, I said finally. I sent him to check the levee. If I'd waited another hour, then someone else would have died. Cross's voice was quiet but firm. You made the call with the information you had. That's what command means. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to keep you from drowning in guilt that isn't yours to carry. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. His uniform was as filthy as mine, dark circles carved under his eyes. His hands, steady, disciplined, Admiral's hands, trembled slightly around the coffee mug. How many? I asked. How many people have you lost? Too many. He stared into his cup. You never forget the names. The faces. That's the price of command, you carry them all. And it gets easier? No. He met my eyes. But you get stronger, not because the weight gets lighter. Because you learn how to bear it. Something shifted in that moment. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but recognition. 2 soldiers, sitting in the ruins, carrying the same ghosts. She used to say something, I murmured. My mother. Whenever I'd come home upset about something I couldn't fix. She'd say, you can't control the storm, M.I.A. more. You can only control the boat. Cross smiled, sad, broken, beautiful. She said that to me once. In Sarajevo, after we lost a convoy to a landmine. I was ready to resign my commission. She wouldn't let me, said the world needed people who stayed when it got hard. She was right, she usually was. We sat there until the coffee went cold, 2 strangers who shared DNA and grief, learning how to exist in the same space without flinching. On the 4th day, everything went to hell. A levee breach north of Marathon sent a wall of water through an evacuation route. 3 trucks were cut off, civilians trapped, water rising fast. The radio crackled with panicked voices. We need immediate airlift. Water's at the windows. Negative, choppers are grounded. Winds are too strong. I was in the command tent when the call came in. Cross was conferencing with FEMA coordinators. I saw his face change as he listened to the radio traffic, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. We can get boats in, I said immediately. The wind's dying down. If we move now, it's too dangerous, Colonel Oakes interrupted. That levee's unstable. If it collapses further, then those people die. I looked at Cross. Sir, I can get them out. For a long moment, he just stared at me. I saw the war happening inside him, the Admiral calculating acceptable losses versus the father terrified of losing the daughter he'd just found. Finally, he nodded. You have 30 minutes. Get them out and get back. Yes, sir. I grabbed Corporal Hayes and Sergeant Chen, 2 of the best boat operators we had. We loaded into a shallow draft rescue boat and pushed into the flooded streets, the water dark and churning with debris. The wind had dropped, but the current was vicious. Every minute, the water climbed higher. By the time we reached the stranded trucks, it was lapping at the door handles. We're here, I shouted. Everyone out, move. 12 civilians, families, elderly, a woman holding a baby, scrambled into our boat. The truck drivers came last, one of them bleeding from a gash on his forehead. That's everyone, Hayes said. Go, go. Chen gunned the engine, and we turned back toward base. That's when I heard it, a sound like God tearing paper. The levee, fracturing. Hold on, I screamed. The wall of water hit us like a freight train. The boat flipped. I went under, the current dragging me backward, tumbling me like clothes in a washer. I couldn't tell which way was up. My lungs burned. Something sharp raked across my arm. Then hands, strong, calloused, grabbed my vest and hauled me up. Hayes, coughing water, his face pale but determined. Got you, ma'am. We broke the surface together, gasping. The boat was 20 feet away, overturned but still floating. Chen was pulling civilians onto the hull. The baby screamed, lungs full of air, beautiful sound. Everyone accounted for? I shouted. All present. A Coast Guard helicopter appeared overhead, lowering a rescue basket. One by one, we loaded the civilians. The baby went first, wrapped in a blanket, wailing her fury at the universe. I went last, my arms screaming, my body shaking with adrenaline and cold. As the basket lifted, I looked down at the wreckage below, the overturned boat, the swirling water, the place where I'd almost drowned. And I thought, this is what she meant. You can't control the storm. When we touched down at base, Admiral Cross was there, waiting. His face was white, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I stepped off the helicopter, soaking wet, bleeding, but whole. All civilians accounted for, sir. No casualties. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, you disobeyed a direct order. Sir, you had 30 minutes. You stayed 45. The entire landing zone went silent. If those people had died, he continued, voice low and dangerous, it would have been on your head. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. Do you understand that I watched you go under and thought I'd just lost the only family I have left? The words hit like a physical blow. Around us, Marines suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. You taught me that duty means finishing the mission. That we don't leave people behind. I did what you would have done. His eyes glistened. I know. That's what terrifies me. He turned abruptly and walked toward the operations tent, shoulders rigid, hands fisted at his sides. Sergeant Chen appeared beside me, offering a towel. That went well, he muttered. I almost laughed. Get the team debriefed. I'll handle the Admiral. Good luck, ma'am. You're gonna need it. That night, the storm finally broke. The sky opened up, rain hammering the base like artillery fire. I found Cross in the operations tent, alone, staring at maps that blurred under the lamplight. You wanted to bench me, I said without preamble. Yes, but you didn't. No. He looked up, exhausted. Because benching you would have proven I'm still the same man who chose his career over everything else. And I'm trying, God, I'm trying, to be someone different. I stepped closer. I'm not asking you to be my father. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I am asking you to treat me like the Marine I am. Not the daughter you wish you'd raised. You think those are different? They have to be. Because if you see me as your daughter every time I go into the field, you'll hesitate. And that hesitation will get people killed. He closed his eyes. You're right. You're absolutely right. But knowing that doesn't make it any easier to watch you risk your life. Then don't watch, I said softly. Trust. Trust that she raised me strong enough to survive this. Trust that your blood runs in my veins, and that means something. When he opened his eyes, they were wet again. I'm so proud of you, Elena. And so afraid of losing you. I don't know how to hold both at the same time. You hold them the way she did. With honor, with faith, with the belief that some promises are worth keeping, even when they cost us everything. The rain drummed harder, drowning out everything except the sound of our breathing. Finally, Cross straightened, pulled himself together with visible effort. Report to medical. Get that arm treated. Then get some sleep. We have 6 more days of operations. Yes, sir. I saluted. He returned it, crisp and perfect. As I turned to leave, he called out, Elena. I paused. Your mother would be proud too. I didn't trust myself to speak. Just nodded and stepped into the rain, letting it wash away the salt and mud and tears I refused to shed. Behind me, through the tent flap, I heard a sound I'd never expected, the Admiral, crying quietly in the darkness. And for the first time since that night in Georgetown, I felt something other than anger. I felt the first fragile stirrings of forgiveness. The medic wrapped my arm with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. The gash was superficial, 7 stitches, butterfly bandages, antibiotics. Nothing that would keep me off duty. You got lucky, Major, she said, tying off the gauze. Another inch to the left and you'd have hit the artery. Story of my life, I muttered. She smiled faintly. Get some rest. Doctor's orders. But rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the water, lungs burning, unable to tell up from down, the current pulling me under. And underneath that fear, a strange exhilaration. This is what she felt. This is what it's like to choose to stay when every instinct screams run. I walked through the base camp in the pre-dawn darkness, my arm throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and shining under floodlights. Marines moved through the compound like ghosts, loading supplies, checking equipment, existing in that liminal space between one crisis and the next. I found myself at the medical tent where we'd brought the civilians from the levee breach. The woman with the baby was sleeping in a cot near the entrance, the infant tucked against her chest, both of them breathing in tandem. She okay? I asked the nurse on duty. Hypothermic when she came in, but she'll be fine. Baby too. You saved their lives, Major. I wanted to say it was just the mission, just following orders. But the words stuck in my throat. Because the truth was messier than that. I'd risk 3 Marines and myself for 12 strangers, and I'd do it again without hesitation. Is this what you felt, Mama? This certainty that some lives are worth the gamble? Major Torres. I turned. Admiral Cross stood a few feet away, still in his mud-stained uniform, circles under his eyes dark enough to be bruises. He nodded toward the compound perimeter. Walk with me. It wasn't a question. We walked in silence past the rows of tents, the motor pool, the temporary morgue where tarps covered shapes we didn't